All right, let's jump into this deep dive. You guys sent in some super interesting stuff on Stoicism, especially Seneca's work.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious if his teachings, can actually help us find a little bit of inner peace in this crazy modern world.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of books and excerpts.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right in and see if this ancient wisdom is actually relevant to our lives today.
It's pretty striking how Stoicism, in a lot of ways, aligns with modern science.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me too, like the idea that the Stoics, all those years ago, believed in universal causality, that everything have a cause.
Mm-hmm.
That feels very scientific. And then you've got the concept of logos, which
Yeah.
feels almost spiritual, but in a very rational way.
Yeah, logos is a really fascinating idea. It's like this underlying principle of reason that governs the universe. It's not like a personal God, but more like this cosmic reason. Some people even connect it to like Einstein's God. That feeling of awe at the universe operating according to these laws. And we can understand them through our own reason.
Okay, so we're not talking about tree hugging.
No.
We're talking about recognizing a kind of order in the universe.
Right.
And speaking of order, we can't talk about Stoicism without talking about Zeno of Citium, the guy who started it all.
Absolutely. There's this great story about Zeno that really illustrates Stoicism in action. So picture this. Zeno, serious philosopher. He's walking through Athens. He's got a pot of lentil soup, and all of a sudden, the pot breaks. Soup's going everywhere. Most people would be mortified. But not Zeno. He uses it as a teaching moment. Starts running away like he's super embarrassed.
Wait, he ran away on purpose.
Oh, yeah. With his teacher, Crates, running after him, yelling, "Why? Run away. Nothing bad has happened."
I love that. It's so funny, but it really makes you think.
It does.
Like it challenges our whole idea of shame and how much power we give to these outside events.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, the only thing embarrassing is how we choose to react.
Hmm.
And that brings us to this really core principle of Stoicism, the dichotomy of control.
Okay.
Stoics were all about focusing on what we can control, thoughts, judgments, reactions, and just accepting what we can't, which is super relevant today, right? It's like the foundation of cognitive reframing in psychology. By changing how we see things, we can actually change how we experience stress.
That makes a lot of sense. But, we're also products of evolution, driven by instincts and all these desires. How does this very rational, controlled Stoicism fit with that side of human nature?
It's a great question. And the Stoics recognize that animal side of us, but they also emphasize that what really sets us apart is our capacity for reason.
Okay.
Epictetus, another big Stoic thinker, he makes this interesting comparison. He said, what is the administrative faculty, like the part of us that makes decisions? It's reason. That's what makes us different from wild beasts or sheep. They only care about what they want when they're hungry. So for the Stoics, it's not about denying our emotions. It's about choosing how we respond to them, using reason.
So Seneca's teachings, this focus on mastering emotions and perceptions, it's all about tapping into that power of reason.
Yes.
Okay. Did that focus on reason and virtue? Did that come from somewhere else?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Socrates, even though he came before the Stoics, was a huge influence. He's the one who articulated those 4 cardinal virtues that the Stoics embraced: practical wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Those formed the bedrock of Stoic ethics.
And can you break those down for us a bit? What do those virtues actually look like in, everyday life?
So let's take courage, for example. In Stoicism, it's not just about physical bravery. It's about having the moral strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when you're facing opposition. Think of Admiral James Stockdale, the prisoner of war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
He endured years of captivity, brutal captivity, and he credits Epictetus' teachings with helping him survive.
That brings us to the Stockdale paradox, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you can believe in a positive outcome while also facing the brutal reality of your situation.
Exactly.
That seems like a perfect example of the dichotomy of control.
It is. It's about accepting what you can't change, but focusing your energy on what you can. And, this highlights a really central question that Seneca grappled with.
What's that?
Can we really find inner peace amidst the chaos and uncertainty of life?
Which I think is what we're really trying to get at in this whole deep dive.
Yes.
So how did Seneca propose we go about finding this inner peace?
Well, Seneca's letters are full of wisdom on this topic. He constantly emphasizes this need to focus on what we can control and let go of what we can't. And that's not about, passive resignation.
Yeah.
It's about actively choosing where we direct our energy.
He also talks a lot about reframing perceptions.
Right.
Right. Seeing challenges as opportunities for growth.
Mm-hmm.
instead of just obstacles.
Absolutely. He recognized how powerful our minds are. Like, he even uses this example. Imagine a broken glass versus losing a loved one.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty big difference.
Right. He's saying, why do we get so upset about something so trivial as a broken glass, yet we resist the natural process of grieving when we face a really significant loss?
It really makes you think about how much suffering we create for ourselves by clinging to things we can't control, resisting that natural flow of life.
Right.
Letting go of that control, though, it's easier said than done. Does he use any other examples to kind of illustrate this?
Oh, yeah. He has tons. Like, he talks about seeing someone bathing really quickly or drinking a lot of wine and how quickly we judge their behavior.
Oh, yeah, we totally
We
do.
make up these stories about why they're doing what they're doing without knowing the full context. He's reminding us to separate fact from opinion, to withhold judgment.
Mm.
And then there's his reflection on mortality, on the fact that our time is limited.
Ooh, that's a big one. I feel like that's something a lot of us try to avoid.
It's definitely uncomfortable. But Seneca saw it as a key to finding peace. By acknowledging our mortality, we can shift our focus from fearing the future to appreciating the present moment.
So instead of wishing things were different, worrying about what might happen, we find peace in just being present.
Exactly.
It's powerful.
Hmm.
But, I keep coming back to this question. How much of this really works in our lives?
Yeah.
I mean, the world Seneca lived in was so different from ours.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with information. There's all this pressure to achieve, to acquire things. It feels like a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, you're right. The modern world throws some unique challenges at us. That constant stream of information, it makes it really hard to find that stillness and clarity Stoicism encourages. And then there's all the societal pressure pushing us toward external validation instead of inner peace.
So it's not just some distant ideal, something that worked back then, but has no place in our fast-paced, tech-driven world.
I wouldn't say that. While applying Stoicism today takes more conscious effort, it can still offer valuable tools.
Okay, so what are some of the benefits? Like, can you give us some specific examples of how it might help us?
Think about stress and anxiety, two huge things we all deal with.
Yeah.
Stoicism gives us techniques for managing those. It teaches us to separate what's in our control from what isn't and focus our energy on what we can influence.
So instead of just getting completely overwhelmed by a situation,
Right.
we can step back and say, okay, what can I actually do about this?
Exactly.
And then focus on taking action.
Stoicism can also help us build resilience.
Okay.
By reframing challenges as opportunities for growth. We develop that strength to face adversity, to find meaning in the tough times.
Yeah.
And let's not forget gratitude. Seneca talked about that a lot.
That's a big one for me.
Yeah.
In a world that's always telling us to want more, to strive for more,
Yeah.
practicing gratitude can be such a game changer. It allows us to appreciate the good things we do have,
Right.
even when things are hard.
It has a huge impact on our overall well-being. And Stoicism can also help us cultivate a sense of purpose. Okay.
When we align our actions with our values, when we focus on contributing to something bigger than ourselves, we find that deeper meaning and satisfaction, no matter what's happening around us.
That's a really powerful point. So while Stoicism might not have all the answers, it gives us a framework
Right.
for living a more meaningful life, even in the midst of all the craziness.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Seneca's Stoicism, even though it comes from ancient philosophy, offers this timeless wisdom that we can apply today. His teachings on mastering emotions, focusing on what we can control, cultivating virtue as that path to happiness, they're just as relevant now as they were centuries ago.
This has been a really eye-opening look into Seneca and Stoicism. We've covered so much. From the Stoic worldview to these specific strategies for inner peace. You mentioned cosmopolitanism earlier.
This idea of being a citizen of the world. And it got me thinking, how does that fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Could Seneca's idea of cosmopolitanism actually be an answer? Like, to address some of these divisions and conflicts we see in the world today?
That's a fascinating question, and it's so relevant to what we're facing right now.
Yeah.
Seneca's cosmopolitanism challenges us
Okay.
to broaden our perspective and see ourselves as part of this larger human family, to recognize our shared humanity, regardless of our differences. Culture, beliefs, background. It's about recognizing that shared humanity.
And how does that tie into Stoicism? and inner peace.
Well, Stoicism emphasizes this interconnectedness of all things. Our actions, thoughts, attitude, they have ripple effects,
Yeah.
impacting not just us, but everyone around us. So if we're constantly judging, comparing, competing,
Yeah.
it creates this disharmony, not just within ourselves, but in our relationships, our communities.
Right.
Cosmopolitanism, from a Stoic perspective, encourages us to shift our focus
Okay.
from self-interest to the common good.
So it's about cultivating empathy.
It is. Understanding, compassion, recognizing that their well-being is intertwined with our own.
You know, that actually makes me think of Seneca's advice about withholding judgment. If we can see each other with more understanding, less judgment,
Yeah.
that would definitely contribute to a more peaceful world.
It's a beautiful connection, isn't it? By practicing cosmopolitanism, we expand our sense of self and contribute to a more harmonious, interconnected world.
You also mentioned that Seneca had some really insightful thoughts on grief and acceptance.
Oh, absolutely. He wrote a lot about loss and grief, drawing from his own experiences
Yeah.
and Stoic principles. He understood that grief is a natural human response,
Of course.
but he also warned against letting it consume us.
So it's not about suppressing grief, like pretending it's not there.
Not at all. Seneca acknowledged the pain, but he encourages us to view it through a Stoic lens, reminding us that death is a natural part of life. We all face it eventually.
Yeah.
By accepting this, we can approach grief with more, calmness.
Yeah. That brings us back to his comparison of the broken glass, to losing a loved one.
Right?
He was highlighting how we get more upset over trivial things than over truly significant losses.
Exactly. Seneca was challenging us to examine our priorities, to respond to life's events with a sense of proportion. He believed that by focusing on what truly matters and accepting what we can't control, we can find peace even in grief.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we cultivate that acceptance? It's easy to say, but much harder to do.
He offers some practical strategies. One is to remember that our time is limited.
Okay.
It can be tough to face that reality, but it can also motivate us to live more fully.
So instead of dwelling on the past, worrying about the future, we focus on appreciating the time we have now,
Exactly.
even in the midst of grieving.
Seneca also encourages us to reflect on the nature of change. Everything's in constant flux, our relationships too.
Yeah.
By understanding that change is inevitable, we can approach loss with more acceptance.
It's like that saying, this too shall pass. Even though grief can feel so overwhelming in the moment, it'll eventually change.
Exactly. And finally, Seneca reminds us that true happiness, or eudaimonia, isn't dependent on external circumstances.
So our sense of well-being, it doesn't have to be shattered, even though we feel sad.
Exactly. That's the key. Seneca's teachings on grief encourage us to find peace within, regardless of what's happening around us.
This has been really helpful in understanding his perspective on grief. But what about the pressure to achieve, to acquire more? I feel like that's something we all face.
Absolutely. Seneca recognized that pursuit of wealth, fame, power, it can become a trap, leading to anxiety, dissatisfaction, even moral compromise.
Right.
It's interesting, he was writing about this centuries ago, but it's so relevant today.
It really is. It's like he can see the future, this whole culture of consumerism, social media.
Exactly.
Well, how did he suggest we break free from that trap?
He goes back to the Stoic emphasis on what we can control. We can't control external circumstances, but we can control our desires and judgments.
So instead of constantly striving for more, we can choose to be content.
That's a core principle. He wasn't advocating for poverty or anything like that,
Right.
but encouraging us to find satisfaction in simpler things.
Yeah.
Living in accordance with nature rather than being driven by these insatiable desires.
There's a certain freedom that comes with that, letting go of the need to constantly acquire more. But how do we actually do that? It's one thing to understand it, but putting it into practice feels different.
Seneca has some practical tips. One is to practice gratitude.
Right.
By focusing on what we have rather than what we lack, we can appreciate the abundance in our lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just shifting our focus to what we're grateful for can be so powerful. Did Seneca have any other suggestions for finding that contentment?
He did. He was a big believer in simplifying our lives.
Okay.
It's about decluttering our homes, cutting back on those unnecessary commitments,
Yeah.
creating space for what truly matters.
So it's like hitting the reset button, clearing out the clutter to make room for something new.
Exactly. And lastly, Seneca reminds us to remember what's truly valuable.
Good.
He argued that true wealth isn't about material possessions, but virtue, living a life guided by wisdom, justice, courage, temperance.
So aligning our actions with our values, focusing on the qualities that enrich our lives rather than those external markers of success.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to shift our focus from chasing externals to cultivating inner peace and virtue.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Seneca's teachings, especially on desire and contentment. As we wrap up this deep dive, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Throughout our conversation, we've seen how Seneca's Stoicism offers these really practical strategies for navigating life's challenges,
Yeah.
from grief and loss to the pressures of modern society. But I think the most important takeaway is self-awareness.
Okay.
Seneca constantly reminds us to examine our judgments, our desires, our reactions to the world around us.
It's not about blindly following a set of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding ourselves better.
Exactly. Stoicism is about cultivating that ability to, observe our own minds, to understand our patterns of thinking, behavior, and make choices that align with our values.
So the real work of Stoicism begins within ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about developing a deep understanding of our own nature, our strengths, weaknesses, using that knowledge to live a more fulfilling, meaningful life.
That's a really powerful message, essential for anyone who wants to actually apply Stoicism to their own life.
I agree. Self-awareness is the foundation of Stoic practice, the key to unlocking the wisdom that Seneca and other Stoic philosophers have to offer.
This deep dive has been a fascinating journey into the world of Seneca and Stoicism.
Yeah.
We've uncovered so much wisdom, from controlling our perceptions to finding contentment, dealing with grief, Seneca's ideas about being a citizen of the world.
It's amazing how relevant these ideas still are, even though they're centuries old.
Right. Seneca's insights into human nature feel so timeless. It really does feel like we found a roadmap, for navigating life. And the best part is, it's not about becoming some emotionless robot.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. It's not about suppressing emotions.
Right.
It's about understanding them, mastering them so they don't control us. It's about cultivating a calm, resilient mind, one that can handle challenges without being overwhelmed.
And that resilience, that inner strength, ultimately leads to a more peaceful, fulfilling life.
Yes.
Even when things are difficult. It's not about pretending everything's perfect.
Yeah.
It's about choosing how we respond to challenges.
Exactly. Focusing on what we can control,
Hmm.
our thoughts, judgments, actions, and letting go of what we can't.
It's practice, right? A
That's it.
constant process
It is.
of self-reflection and adjustment. Like any worthwhile practice, it takes time and effort.
But it's so worth it. Imagine a life where you're not just reacting to everything, where you're grounded and able to find peace and meaning no matter what's going on.
That's a beautiful vision. And Seneca's teachings offer a path to get there. It's a journey, right,
It is.
of self-discovery and growth.
And what's great about Stoicism is that it's for everyone. It's rooted in the power of human reason, empowering us to take control of our minds, create a better life.
We've just scratched the surface here, but I hope this has sparked your curiosity. There's so much wisdom to be found in Seneca's work and in Stoicism as a whole.
I encourage you to keep learning and to see how these ideas can impact your own life.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Seneca and Stoicism. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking that inner peace that's always within reach.